Imagine the silence of a small Welsh town in 1978, broken not by footsteps or whispers, but by two voices that sounded like echoes from another world. Voices belonging to June and Jennifer Gibbons, twins born in secrecy of spirit, yet chained together by a language no outsider could enter. They were not just children. They were architects of a realm sealed away from family, teachers, even doctors. A secret kingdom of syllables that no dictionary could explain. From their earliest breath, they turned away from the world, retreating deeper into each other. When teachers called their names, they did not answer. When parents demanded their presence, they stayed silent. Their lips moved only for each other. Their words rolled like fire and water fused into one rhythm, incomprehensible to outsiders, but flowing with a frightening fluency. The world called it cryptophagia, but the truth was darker. It was not just a private language. It was a prison of identity, a spell cast upon their own existence. As years passed, observers thought they were cursed or perhaps blessed. Yet the closer experts looked, the more unsettling it became. These girls were not learning from the world. They were inventing a reality that rejected it. They mirrored each other's movements, walked with synchronized steps, wrote stories of shadows and violent destinies. The deeper you peer into their diaries, the more it feels like opening a door never meant to be unlocked. It was as if their bond had fused into one identity, yet identity itself became the battlefield. If one laughed, the other frowned. If one lived brightly, the other sank into darkness. Each was a reflection and a rival, a partner and a prisoner. Their connection went beyond the psychological. It felt ancient, like the twin myths found in forgotten cultures where one must die for the other to live. This is not merely a childhood story. It is the beginning of a descent, a reminder that some truths whisper in places science cannot measure. For what they created was not just a language, but a pact. And once you step inside their silence, you will never emerge the same. The walls of their small bedroom became a kingdom none could invade. There they wrote in secret filling journals with stories darker than their age should have known. In their handwriting you find tales of betrayal, fires burning cities and lovers strangled in obsession. These were not innocent fairy tales. These were prophecies etched in ink, as if they were trying to summon something no child should summon. Outside their door the world called them mute, silent twins, ghost sisters. Their teachers labeled them broken. Their neighbors whispered of curses. Their parents prayed for change, but inside the two of them spoke endlessly in a torrent of rhythm, words, and laughter that sounded foreign even to trained ears. It was not madness, it was mastery. A language carved for two and for two alone, yet this devotion became a chain. Their silence in public turned every glance into suspicion. Every authority figure sought to break their code. Speech therapists tested them. Psychiatrists probed them. Educators tried to separate them. But the more pressure applied, the more violently they resisted, like a body rejecting poison. When forced apart, they collapsed into stillness, refusing to eat, refusing to move, refusing to breathe life into the world without the other. What terrified the doctors was not only their refusal to speak, but their eerie synchronization. When June's hand twitched, Jennifer's would follow. When Jennifer closed her eyes, June's breathing slowed. They mirrored each other with the precision of shadows at noon, as though they were one body split into two. This was no simple psychological phenomenon. It was a ritual of identity where individuality itself had no right to exist. The deeper you go, the clearer it becomes. They were not hiding from the world. The world was hiding from them. Society could not understand two children who decided to abandon its rules and create their own. They were no longer products of Wales in 1978. They had become living evidence that the mind could sever ties with consensus reality and build something forbidden. Their silence was not weakness. It was rebellion, and rebellion in children is terrifying because it reveals a power ungoverned by law or authority. If you dare to look closely, you will feel the chill of recognition. What they carried was not childish play. It was a weapon concealed in silence. A weapon that no one saw coming until it was too late. As the twins grew older, their silence hardened into a wall that no authority could climb. They began to pour their hidden world into notebooks, crafting entire universes of violence, tragedy, and twisted love. Their writings revealed characters who strangled children, set fires to houses, and lived in constant betrayal. Their teachers thought it was the imagination of disturbed girls, but their words dripped with intent, as if they were not merely inventing but confessing. By adolescence, their pact of silence turned into an unspoken law. If one spoke, the other refused. If one breathed life into a sentence, the other suffocated in resentment. Balance had to be maintained, even if it meant destroying themselves. They were no longer simply twins. They were rivals bound by chains of blood. The more you study them, the more it feels as though one life force had been split into two warring halves. Neither could rise without dragging the other into darkness. In public, they walked with robotic precision, heads lowered, steps in perfect unison. The villagers whispered that they were cursed, touched by a shadow that defied human explanation. What frightened people most was not what they said, but what they refused to say. Silence became their shield, and their curse. Their refusal to conform threatened the illusion of order that schools, churches, and hospitals tried to enforce. Society does not fear words. It fears silence. Silence that mocks its control. Doctors tried separation once more, placing them in different boarding schools. The result was catastrophic. They withered away in isolation, refusing food, refusing contact, nearly descending into death. The message was clear. To separate them was to kill them. To unite them was to fuel a storm that no one could contain. Their parents stood helpless before a force that no parental love could soften. The twins had already crossed the threshold into something darker. The late 1970s. The world saw them as anomalies, but they were far more dangerous than anomalies. They were proof that identity is not fixed, proof that human connection could become possession. They were twin souls trapped in a pact of destruction. Their silence screamed louder than words ever could. And beneath that silence grew a destiny that neither medicine nor faith could prevent. When the twins entered their teenage years, the silence that once confined them began to erupt in dangerous ways. They discovered that rebellion was not only in words, but in fire, theft, and destruction. They began breaking into shops, stealing small items, setting fire to buildings. Their crimes were not random. They were rehearsals for freedom, attempts to carve out a life of action that matched the chaos within them. Authorities saw them as delinquents, but their acts were more than mischief. They were ritualistic. Every theft, every blaze was committed together, never alone, as if each action needed both signatures in order to exist. Their diaries revealed the truth. They wrote of burning houses and people trapped inside. They spoke of power of feeling alive only when danger surrounded them. It was no longer a secret language, but a secret war against the world. The town began to whisper more loudly now. Children who once avoided them out of confusion began to fear them. Adults crossed the street when the twins appeared. Their silence had transformed into menace. They no longer needed to speak to spread fear. Their presence itself was enough. It was as though the air around them grew heavier, as if carrying the weight of unseen fire. When they were finally caught and put before the law, the courtroom did not see two teenagers. It saw a mystery wrapped in flesh. The judge looked at them, not as ordinary offenders, but as something uncanny. Two bodies controlled by a single force. They were sentenced not to prison, but to Broadmoor Hospital, a high-security psychiatric institution designed for the most dangerous of minds. Society did not know what to do with them, so it locked them away in the same place reserved for killers. But what Broadmoor did not understand was that the twins had already created their own prison long before the gates closed. Their bond was the cell, their silence, the guard, their puny. Schmidt was not confinement. It was existence itself, for in their hearts they knew the truth. One could not survive without the other, yet one would not be free until the other was gone. Broadmoor was a fortress of silence and screams, a place where murderers and madmen roamed the same halls. Now into this cage stepped June and Jennifer, still moving in perfect rhythm, still refusing the world entry. The doctors believed they could unravel the mystery, but the twins resisted every attempt. Therapists spoke to them and were met with vacant stares. Nurses monitored them and saw movements mirrored like reflections on black water. Their silence became a weapon in a place designed to break silence. The girls wrote in their diaries more than ever before, pouring every secret onto the page. June confessed that Jennifer had power over her, that she felt strangled by her shadow. Jennifer in turn wrote that June was stealing her life and must be stopped. The words cut deeper than any scalpel. They revealed not just a bond, but a duel. Two wills locked in a war, where only one would rise. Their writings made it clear. This was not companionship. This was possession. Days in Broadmoor stretched into years. Their bodies dulled by heavy medication, their eyes vacant from the weight of drugs. Yet still their language persisted, whispering between them like a current no one else could feel. Doctors tried to separate them within the hospital to test the strength of their link. But time and again, the result was collapse. Their health declined, their spirits drained. One refused to eat, the other followed. One refused to move, the other became a statue. They were like two candles sharing the same flame. Extinguish one, and both would fade. What disturbed staff most was the shift in their diaries. Their fantasies grew darker. They wrote of death, as release of sacrifice as destiny. June feared that Jennifer must die. Jennifer feared that June was stealing her soul. It was a prophecy written in loop, a script that seemed to demand one final act of surrender. Even among the most violent patients in Broadmoor, the twins were whispered about. Their silence was more unsettling than screams, their bond more dangerous than rage. By the early 1990s, whispers of release began to stir, but freedom for the twins did not mean freedom for both. Somewhere inside their pact lay an agreement unspoken yet undeniable. One must fall so the other could walk away. What the world did not know was that this bargain had already been sealed long before the gates of Broadmoor opened. The day of release approached, and with it came a tension so thick it clung to the very air. The twins knew something was coming. They had written it over and over in their diaries, words that carried the weight of prophecy. June scribbled that freedom would only come if Jennifer died. Jennifer in turn admitted that she was prepared for that end, prepared to lay down her life as though it were part of some ancient contract. The doctors dismissed it as delusion, but they did not understand the gravity of a pact made in silence. As they were transferred from Broadmoor to a lower security clinic, the twins sat side by side in the back of the van. They did not speak. They did not need to. The bond between them had already chosen its outcome. Witnesses later recalled that Jennifer leaned her head on June's shoulder, whispered a few words, and then closed her eyes. By the time they arrived, Jennifer was dead. Her heart had simply stopped. No struggle, no wound, no warning. The medical reports could not explain it. There was no poison, no trauma, nothing measurable to point to. Yet Jennifer was gone and June lived on. When questioned, June did not cry. She did not beg for answers. She simply said, Jennifer had chosen it, that it had been decided between them long ago. June spoke as though the death was not tragedy, but release, as though her sister's silence had finally freed her voice. From that day forward, June began to speak. She interacted with people she once shut out. She lived a life she had never touched, while Jennifer remained forever still. Their pact had been fulfilled, and in the fulfillment, something unnatural had revealed itself. Science calls it coincidence. Psychiatry calls it psychosis. But those who look deeper see something else. A sacrifice. A ritual carried out not in temples or altars, but in the unbreakable silence between two sisters. The world tries to bury stories like these, labeling them unsolved mysteries or medical curiosities. But what you have just seen is evidence. Evidence that identity can merge and collapse. Evidence that death can be chosen not by one but by two bound as one. June and Jennifer were not victims of illness. They were witnesses to a truth older than any institution. A truth that still whispers in silence today. June walked out of Broadmoor, a different being, not because the hospital had healed her, but because Jennifer was gone. The silence that once chained her now loosened its grip. For the first time in decades, she began to speak, to laugh, to engage with the world. She told interviewers that she felt free, that Jennifer's death had been a sacrifice willingly given so that she could live. What sounded like relief to some sounded like confession to others, as though the bargain had been sealed in bloodless ritual. In her journals, June wrote that her sister had given her life for her to speak. These were not words of metaphor. They were the raw testimony of someone who had lived under the crushing weight of possession. To understand this, you must abandon the illusion that death always comes by chance. Sometimes death is chosen. Sometimes it is exchanged. Jennifer did not collapse from weakness. She surrendered as though fulfilling a contract written in silence. Since childhood, society wanted to turn the story into a medical anomaly. Two twins with selective mutism. One dies, the other recovers, neatly packaged for textbooks and psychiatric papers. But listen carefully, and you hear the undertone. This was not science. This was sacrifice. The same patterns echo through history, from ancient rituals of twins offered to the gods, to the whispered belief that one life must end for another to ascend. What happened in Wales was not isolated. It was a shadow of a truth. Humanity has always feared. For the men who seek hidden knowledge, let this disturb you. The bond of the twins reveals that human identity is not fixed. It can merge, split, and consume like fire in dry grass. The self you think unshakable can be rewritten by forces you cannot see. And when the cost of freedom demands sacrifice, the line between victim and executioner vanishes. June did not kill Jennifer, but Jennifer died for June. That is the essence of forbidden power. It does not ask. It takes. The world will tell you. This was tragedy, but tragedy is the mask worn by transformation. What happened to the twins was transformation of the darkest kind. One life extinguished, one life awakened, and the silence between them echoing louder than any scream. The question left is not how it happened, but whether you are prepared to see that the same forces surround your own life, waiting for their price. After Jennifer's death, June stepped into the world as if reborn, but the shadow of what happened followed her like a specter. Reporters tried to frame it as survival, a medical miracle. Yet beneath the headlines was a silence heavier than words. Could two souls truly share one fate? Could one consciously hand her life over so the other could breathe? These questions stalked June wherever she went, but she never trembled. She spoke calmly, even with a strange serenity, about the sacrifice her sister had made. She told interviewers that she and Jennifer had always known it would end this way, that one of them must go for the other to live. She admitted that it had been Jennifer's choice, spoken in a whisper that only June could hear in the final moments. This was not madness. This was ritual carried out in human flesh, a silent pact that defied medicine and mocked psychology. Because no pill, no doctor, no institution could untangle what bound them, June's emergence into speech was unsettling, not because she found words, but because of how naturally they flowed. It was as if they had been stored inside her all along, waiting for the moment of release. She became animated, expressive, even hopeful. But that transformation came at the cost of her sister's life. That is the part no one dares to acknowledge. The world celebrates survival but ignores the dark engine that powers it. Sacrifice. Look at history, and you will see this pattern repeated again and again. In myths, twins are bound to sacrifice one another. One ascends, the other descends. Castor and Pollux, Romulus and Remus. The living cannot rise until the other is swallowed by shadow. June and Jennifer were not anomalies. They were the living continuation of an archetype as old as humanity itself. Their silence was the language of destiny, and their final act was the sealing of a timeless truth. The lesson is not about twins. It is about the cost of becoming whole. To unlock your voice, to claim your freedom, something must die within or around you. The price may not always be blood, but it is always real. That is why their story unsettles the soul. Because deep down you know this truth already. You too are bound by contracts you never signed, waiting for the moment when the price is demanded. June carried on with life, but she could never outrun the silence that birthed her story. Each step she took into freedom was also a step deeper into the abyss of memory. The world wanted to study her, dissect her, and frame her as a case study in selective mutism or shared psychosis. But June knew the truth. She was not a patient. She was a vessel. Her words now belonged to her, but only because Jennifer had surrendered her own. The very act of speaking was a daily reminder that her sister's heartbeat had been the offering. Consider what this means. A human identity so entangled that survival itself requires the extinguishing of another. This is not coincidence. This is blueprint. The evidence is everywhere in myths, rituals, secret societies that all speak of one life, fueling another. The ancients encoded it in their stories. The institutions of today bury it in clinical files. Yet the pattern remains. Sacrifice is the toll gate between silence and power, between shadow and speech. Men who hear this must ask themselves how much of their own silence has been purchased by unseen sacrifices, whose blood has watered the ground you stand upon. Every nation, every institution, every throne has been built, not on order, but on offerings of those who were erased. History does not write their names, but their absence becomes the language of power. The twins were simply a mirror of the same law written across centuries. You cannot have dominion without surrender. You cannot ascend without another falling. When you listen to June speak after Jennifer's death, you do not hear freedom. You hear the voice of inheritance. She inherited language like one inherits property. And what was the price? The life of her twin. No jury can rule this. No textbook can measure it. It belongs to the realm of forbidden history, a place where human lives intertwine with archetypes that institutions dare not name. You must see the gravity. Of this knowledge is not always gift. Sometimes it is wound. June's voice was born from her sister's silence. And as you let that truth sink in, ask yourself, what price will your own awakening demand? Because make no mistake, the law of sacrifice is not confined to twins. It surrounds you, waits for you, and sooner or later it will call your name. The world recorded the death of Jennifer Gibbons as sudden heart inflammation, a clinical explanation that fit neatly into paperwork. But those who stood closest felt something different. They described it as if she had simply decided to stop living, as though her body obeyed a command, whispered from a deeper place. June confirmed this, not with hysteria, but with calm. She said it had been arranged, a pact signed in silence long before the hospital gates closed. What medicine could not explain the twins had already written in their diaries. This is where the story pierces the boundary between science and the forbidden, between psychology and ritual, between coincidence and covenant. The silence of the twins was not empty. It was a container, a vessel for forces larger than themselves. When Jennifer's heart stopped, it was not weakness, but transaction, a life handed over, so another could live unchained. For those who study hidden history, this is not anomaly, this is alignment, the playing out of an ancient pattern in modern flesh. Remember this detail. The twins spent their lives in near total silence. Yet on the day of transfer, Jennifer spoke. She leaned on June and whispered, "Now it is time." That single phrase held the weight of years of silence. And then she let go. What is that, if not invocation? What is that, if not ritual fulfillment? No religion was spoken. No altar stood before them. But the essence was identical. A life offered a passage. Open to silence broken. Men who seek mastery must face this reality. Power never comes freely. It is always paid for, often in ways the world pretends not to see. The Gibbons twins were living proof. They remind us that the line between psychology and sorcery is thinner than we admit. The doctors cataloged symptoms. The courts punished crimes. But in truth, these twins enacted something that institutions could not contain. A sacrifice echoing the oldest laws of power. Understand this, and you understand why their story unsettles so many. Because it forces us to confront that transformation is not gentle, it is violent. It demands death in one form or another. You cannot rise without burial. You cannot speak without silence. Consumed. Jennifer's death is not just a mystery. It is the revelation of the price written into the fabric of existence itself. After Jennifer's death, June walked free from Broadmoor and into a world that had never known her voice. The newspapers spun the tale into something digestible, a strange case resolved by tragedy. Yet behind the headlines lay a deeper truth. June did not just leave a hospital. She crossed a threshold. One existence ended, another began. The silence that had trapped her was broken, not by therapy or medicine, but by death itself. The world applauded her recovery, never realizing that it was purchased with bloodless sacrifice. Her speech flowed with eerie ease. Reporters described her as articulate, lively, even charming. But listen closer and you hear something uncanny. Her voice did not sound like a voice found after years of muteness. It sounded practiced, fluent, as though it had always been there waiting. And perhaps it had. For in the diaries the twins wrote of destinies exchanged of one fading, so the other could shine. June was not healed. She was inhabited. She was carrying two lives in one body. This is the forbidden angle institutions dare not face. The possibility that human identity is not fixed, but transferable. That the boundary between two souls can blur until one consumes the other. Psychology calls it fusion. Medicine calls it delusion. But the ancients called it possession. And when Jennifer died, June became its living vessel. She spoke with the strength of two, yet carried the shadow of sacrifice in every word. To those listening, this is more than a story of twins. It is a mirror into power itself. Because to ascend, you must accept that something must be left behind. Some part of you must be consumed, destroyed, or surrendered. The twins simply embodied this law in its rawest form. One lived because the other vanished. June's freedom was not free. It was ransom paid in silence and sealed in death. So when you hear June's laughter in interviews, understand what you are truly hearing. You are hears. In the echo of Jennifer, you are hearing the sound of a life bought with another life, the kind of exchange most men ignore until it arrives at their own door. The truth is simple. Transformation has a cost, and those who deny it remain trapped in silence forever. June tried to live as though she was finally free, but freedom is never without chains. Her voice may have been unlocked yet. It was forged in the crucible of loss. The weight of Jennifer's absence followed her through every conversation, every smile, every interview. She could move through society now, blending in as a woman who had conquered silence, but the truth remained hidden. She was not just June. She was June, carrying Jennifer within her, a dual existence wrapped in one fragile frame. The world treated her story as a curiosity, a strange footnote in medical history. But for those who looked deeper, it was an initiation. June did not simply escape. She survived by absorbing a life that was not hers. This is the oldest law disguised in modern tragedy. A soul cannot simply vanish. It must be transferred, transformed, taken up by another. In ancient rituals, kings absorbed the lives of their sacrificed servants. In secret cults, power was inherited through death and silence. The twins acted out this archetype without ever naming it. Listen carefully, and you will see that silence was their altar. It was not emptiness, but a container of power. Words were withheld not because they lacked them, but because they were being stored charged, waiting for the final exchange. And when that moment came, when Jennifer let go, June opened the vault. That is why her speech flowed with such force, not stammered, not broken, but whole, as if she was carrying not one voice but two. Men hearing this must confront a darker mirror. What within you has been silenced, waiting to emerge? What must be surrendered for you to step into your power? Because nothing is born without something dying. Transformation is not cheap. It is a transaction. You pay for every awakening, and the cost is always higher than you expect. June's story is not strange. It is law written in human blood and silence. The lesson is carved into her life for anyone willing to see. If you want to claim your voice, if you want to step beyond the prison that holds you, something must be given up willingly or taken from you. The question is not if, the question is when. Because the gate will open one way or another, and when it does, you will face the price the same way. June did, standing on the bones of silence. Years passed, but the shadow never lifted. June lived among people, yet she carried the weight of an invisible presence. Every conversation she had was haunted. Every word she spoke was tethered to the silence of her twin. She could walk in daylight, but her story remained a midnight tale, whispered only by those who dared to see the truth. She was not simply surviving. She was embodying a contract, one that had never been signed on paper, but carved into the very core of her being. The media tried to frame her life as recovery, as triumph over mutism. They called it inspiration. They called it resilience. But what they did not call it was sacrifice. The one word that explains everything, because June's freedom was not born from therapy or patience. It was purchased by Jennifer's death. The public applauded without realizing they were clapping for a ritual complete. For every word June spoke was a reminder of what had been taken away. Look closer, and you see that their story is not isolated. It echoes through the hidden archives of history. In ancient tribes, a twin was sometimes offered to the gods to ensure balance. In royal bloodlines, one sibling often disappeared quietly so the other could ascend. Institutions bury these truths, but the patterns remain unchanged. Someone must vanish so someone else can rise. The Gibbons twins simply revealed this ancient script in a world that pretends such things no longer happen. This is why their tale unsettles. It forces men to ask the question no one wants to face. What am I willing to lose to gain my voice? What must die within me for my true self to be born? The lesson of the twins is not comfortable. It is not entertainment. It is dangerous knowledge, knowledge that breaks illusions and strips away excuses. They did not just live, they enacted the oldest commandment of power: sacrifice or remain in silence forever. So when you picture June sitting before camera, see speaking with calm confidence, remember what you are truly witnessing. You are seeing the aftermath of an offering. You are hearing a voice that exists only because another heart stopped beating. The cost of truth is never abstract. It is flesh and blood. And if you wish to awaken, if you wish to step into the forbidden, you too must one day decide which silence must die, so your voice can finally live. June continued her life beyond the hospital walls, but the silence never truly ended. It lingered like a phantom in her shadow, a constant reminder that every word she spoke had been bought with the stillness of her twin. She walked among ordinary people, but she was not ordinary. She was carrying the weight of a contract invisible to the eyes of the world. The crowd saw freedom, yet what they did not see was the pact sealed in secrecy, the exchange that could never be reversed. The system filed her away as a closed case, a medical anomaly, a strange story of recovery. But systems always do this. They bury the unexplainable under tidy labels. They silence what threatens their order. The twins had revealed something institutions could never admit: that human identity is not fixed, that power can pass like a torch from one body to another, that silence itself can be weapon and altar. The files on their case may be closed, but the truth remains alive, whispering through history. Consider this. When June began to speak, it was not halting, not hesitant, but fluent, as if the words were not learned but inherited, as if the language that had been locked away was not created in her throat, but poured into her from a deeper source. Psychologists call it coincidence. They say trauma resolved itself, but the pattern is far older, more primal. It is possession by sacrifice. A truth too raw for clinical notes, too dangerous for public acceptance. And here lies the revelation that men must not ignore. Transformation does not arrive wrapped in comfort. It arrives through death, through surrender, through silence. Shattered June's freedom was a ritual outcome, and whether she acknowledged it or not, her life testified to the price of power. This is why her story is more than curiosity. It is an initiation. It is a mirror for anyone who dares to rise. When you look at June Gibbons, you are not looking at a survivor. You are looking at a vessel, a body that speaks for two, a life that carries the echo of another's heartbeat. You are seeing the law of exchange written in human form, and if you listen closely enough, you will hear the question it asks you. What will you surrender? What silence will you sacrifice so that your voice may finally be heard? June tried to move forward, building a life that appeared normal, but there was no escaping the invisible thread that bound her to Jennifer. The silence had been broken, yet the bond remained stronger than any chain. Every step she took was a step walked by two. Every word she spoke was a word carried by two. She was alive, yet she was also haunted because survival is never clean. It is never free. It always carries shadows. The institutions that studied the twins wanted to claim victory. They wanted to say science had solved the riddle. They wrote papers, they gave interviews, they closed the file. But science did not solve this story. It only buried it under labels like selective mutism or shared psychosis. Yet those words are veils. They hide the reality that something older and darker was moving beneath. What happened to the twins was not illness, it was initiation. They stumbled into a forbidden realm and lived out an ancient law that modern society pretends does not exist. June's fluency after Jennifer's death was not the product of healing. It was the product of transfer. Language was inherited. Voice was inherited. Power was inherited. This is not rare if you know where to look. Throughout history, brothers have inherited the strength of fallen brothers. Warriors have carried the spirits of the dead into battle. Leaders have absorbed the energy of their rivals. The twins simply revealed this truth in a raw, undeniable way. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. For men listening, this is the lesson. Do not mistake survival for victory. June's survival was not triumph. It was burden wrapped in breath. She carried Jennifer everywhere she went, and in doing so, she revealed the truth of transformation. It is never clean. It is never light. It is always purchased at a cost. If you seek to break silence in your own life, if you seek to awaken and ascend, you too must decide what will be sacrificed within you. June's story warns and teaches. At the same time, it shows that power is not given. It is taken through exchange. It shows that silence is not weakness, but potential, waiting to erupt. And it shows that awakening is not cheap. It demands payment. The only question is whether you will pay willingly or whether fate will take it from you, just as it did with the twins. June lived on, but she was never free from the gravity of her past. She could smile, she could answer questions, she could walk among crowds, but inside she was still standing at the edge of a silent abyss. The ghost of Jennifer was not behind her. It was inside her, woven into the very rhythm of her speech. Every breath was shared. Every thought was doubled. She had escaped the hospital walls, yet she could never escape the contract written in silence and sealed in death. The world looked at her with fascination. Some saw her as a medical marvel, others as a tragic curiosity, but almost no one saw the truth. They missed the darker pattern, the one that repeats through the ages again and again, the law of exchange, the law that nothing emerges without cost, that power cannot manifest without sacrifice. June was proof of this eternal script. She did not simply gain her voice, she inherited it. She took it from the grave. History echoes with this rhythm. In ancient rites, a twin was sometimes surrendered so the other could embody strength. In forgotten rituals, one sibling's life was offered so the other could channel unseen forces. The Gibbons twins revealed that this law still operates even in modern times. Their silence, their pact, their final exchange was not madness, it was ritual. Whether they understood it or not, they acted out a script older than civilization itself. And this is where the lesson cuts deepest. Men who hear this story must face the reflection that stares back from the abyss. What silence within you is waiting to be shattered? What part of you must die so the other part can rise? For June, it was her twin. For you, it may be fear, weakness, addiction, or the false self you cling to. Transformation does not arrive with comfort. It arrives when something is taken, when something is surrendered. Do not think of June as a survivor. Think of her as a vessel carrying the inheritance of two lives. Her voice was not hers alone. It was the echo of Jennifer speaking through her. The two became one, not through choice but through sacrifice. And in that truth lies the forbidden key. If you seek awakening, you must accept the price. You must stand at the same abyss and ask yourself, am I willing to pay? June's life after the institution looked ordinary to the outside world. She worked, she traveled, she even gave interviews, yet behind every appearance of normalcy was a current of shadow. She was never just one person. She carried the weight of two. Every step was doubled. Every breath echoed by the absence of Jennifer. She was alive, but she was also haunted. For men who listen closely, her life is not simply survival, it is testimony. Testimony to a law older than nations, older than religion, older than language itself. Jennifer's death was not an ending. It was a transaction, a closing of one chapter, so another could open. The silence was not broken by therapy or progress. It was shattered by exchange. The voice June spoke with was not born in her lungs alone. It was poured into her. It was inheritance through sacrifice. To deny this is to deny the truth that has echoed through human history. Time and again we see this law disguised in rituals and wars and bloodlines, in hidden initiations. One must fall so the other can ascend. The public wanted a story of healing. They wanted to clap for June as proof of resilience, but the truth is harsher and more dangerous. She was not healed, she was chosen. She became the vessel of two lives. Her fluency, her confidence, her very existence in the public eye was never hers alone. It was the combined force of the pact she shared with Jennifer. That is why her story unsettles us, because deep down we recognize the same law at work in ourselves. Every man carries silence within him. Silence that binds and chains. Silence that holds him back from his own awakening. But silence does not release without price. Something must die. Something must be surrendered. Fear, weakness, falsehood, illusions. All of these are candidates for sacrifice, but the decision is never abstract. It is as real as blood, as final as death. The twins showed us this in human form. They revealed the hidden thematics of transformation, and forced us to look. So remember, when you hear June's voice, you are not listening to one person. You are listening to a covenant, a merging born from loss, a law written not in books but in breath and silence. And this law now stands before you, asking the same question. What will you give up so your true self may finally speak? This is where the descent ends, yet also where it begins. June. Gibbons lived her life as the vessel of two, and in her survival, we see not victory, but revelation. She did not escape. She was transformed. She was marked by the law that demands sacrifice before awakening. The world looked away. The institutions closed the file. The story was buried under explanations that soothe the masses. But the truth remains alive. It is alive in her silence, in her words, in the pact of blood and shadow that she carried until her final breath. You were never supposed to hear this story, not in its true form. You were meant to accept the official record and move on, believing it was just a case of troubled twins. Yet here you are standing at the edge of knowledge that cannot be unseen. The law is not theirs alone. It is yours too. Transformation will never come without loss. Awakening will never arrive without surrender. The question is not if, but when. The question is not whether you will pay, but what part of you will be chosen as payment. Jennifer gave her life so June could speak. That is the story on the surface, but beneath it lies a mirror held up to every man. What silence binds you? What truth waits inside you? What must be sacrificed so that you may awaken? You cannot walk this path with both comfort and power. You must choose, and once chosen, you cannot turn back. The twins are proof of this. They are the whisper in your ear, reminding you that identity is never given. It is forged. It is exchanged. It is bought with silence. So I ask you one final time, if you have walked with me through this descent, if you have seen what the world hides, then speak it into the shadows. Type the phrase, "The silence is the price" twice in the comments below. Do it not just for the algorithm, but as a seal on your own transformation. Let it mark you as one who has seen, one who knows, one who dares to carry forbidden truth, because once you have heard the story of the twins who spoke a language no one taught and vanished together. You are no longer the same man. You cannot return to ignorance. The silence now belongs to you, and what you do with it will determine whether you remain asleep or awaken.